So, dear Learning Geeks listener, when I ask you about learning communities, do you think about communities of learning people like us, or do you think about communities of people who learn from each other? What if I told you that it was both at the same time, or either, or anything like that? Anyway, we're going to get to the bottom of this with Ben Chambers, the head of Learning, Performance, and Talent, in this episode of the Learning Geeks podcast, starting now. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back. Welcome back. How is everybody doing today? We were just talking. We're recording this in October. I don't know when we'll put it out, Jake. It's always
October, but might be next year.
Exactly.
No, it'll be November. I'll probably be November. Yeah.
Here in Long Beach, it definitely feels like spooky season. I mean, I looked out the window and it is a layer of fog. It is like Silent Hill, if that means anything to you. If not, you should play more video games. It's very creepy and chilly out here. But how's it by you guys?
We have a huge fire, 22,000 acres. I think it's been.
Wow.
It's on the other side of the mountains from where I am, but we're getting the smoke in here. And so when I go out on my morning bike rides, I often come back and I go, that smell like smoke. So, just a quick funny thing on the trail. There's a lot of kids that go out with sidewalk chalk to write positive messages because some people use it for running, some for biking.
Either way, it's hard.
They never know which way to put the words, like, because you're approaching them. Do you put it this way or do you put it this way, right? So their message is like, you got this. But if you read it the other way, it's this got you. Right? Or promise me you won't quit. Or quit, won't you promise me? So anyway, it's fun to read the messages and go, okay, I think they meant this one.
Are you getting those messages at least on your back? I was going to say.
No, this is a true story.
Okay, it's feeling dad.
No, this is a true story.
Okay.
No.
Okay, all right.
I'll take pictures and send them to you guys.
Please do.
It sounds like an accident waiting to happen as well. You're trying to right past it. Like
especially when they have full sentences written out. It's like, oh, wait, do I start at the top or the bottom?
Are you at least getting those messages on your way home, like the positive side of it, or has it been random?
They have them both ways. That's
That's great.
And
That's really
it's interesting because, it's very nice. I think kids just come out and say, their little church groups or whatever go out and say, let's write positive messages to the runners.
Supportive.
And apparently Abby is somebody's big fan because a lot of these are, you got this, Abby. Or Abby is great. Or I have no idea who Abby is, but no.
That's wonderful.
So,
great.
Anyway, that's how it is out here, Bob.
Amazing. Well, Jake, I'm going to let you introduce our guest, Ben, and then he can tell us.
Ben's been sitting very patiently, listening to us banter.
I feel like I'm being very British because the weather conversation is because I started a conversation about weather, which is just a stereotype thing that we do. I don't know whether you start everyone with the weather conversation, but I feel like I should apologise being British, bringing the weather into the room.
So Ben is an expert in learning talent development, including leadership development, learning communities, and then performance measurement. He's a former head of learning of performance and talent at Grant Thornton in the UK, as long as with some other head of learning roles before that. He's also the founder of the Talent and Leadership Club, which consists of 1,000 members in over 40 countries and over 300 organizations represented. And then, given Ben's experience in learning committees and the spike in committees, honestly, in the general, given in the last 4 to 5 years or so, we thought it'd be great to have Ben on, discuss some of the learnings he's had with leading this type of community, discuss the value, why we're seeing this rise in in this amount of time, and then also any lessons that we think we could take away for you as the listener as well. So welcome, Ben, to the show.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
But before we jump into communities, I did want to say really quick is noticing your former and hopefully future title as learning performance and talent head. Love having performance in there, especially given some of the conversations we've been having recently. I think that's fantastic. So kudos.
I think
to
it's
you,
really
sir.
important. It's a whole nother conversation, but I think with the advancement of AI, actually, what we will be doing as learning professionals is more about performance enablement rather than sort of like learning, because AI should be able to bring to fruition the kind of the aspirations we've had for years, decades around kind of learning in the flow of work. So when you think about that, when learning happens at the point of need, then our roles turned to performance specialists
Exactly.
rather than learning specialists.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Love it.
That's
Love
great.
it.
It was accidental. I wouldn't say it was deliberately put in there, but it's a
You are
happy
a
accident.
sage. You are a sage into the future. That's great.
That's great. So Ben, why don't you start off and kind of share? Let's start with the community that you're leading right now, and share more about Talent Leadership Club that you're leading, and how you got it started, and how it came to be right now. But just give that background for the listeners to learn more about it.
Cool. Okay, I'll do it, but try not to make it too much advert because, I mean, I started it years ago. Like, I'll be honest, it wasn't entirely altruistic. I used to work in consultancy, and I used to meet people every day who I thought would benefit from meeting each other, but there wasn't really a kind of forum for them doing it. So I just said to a bunch of friends, who just happened to be sort of mid-senior level people within organizations that come to learning and talent and performance, that I'll just bring you together, do the admin, and we'll have a conversation, and it'll be good fun and useful. And they liked it, and it kind of grew to sort of a couple of hundred people over that time. Then I went to work at GSK, and people, I guess, realized I was doing it for the right reasons, and it kind of grew quite a lot overnight. And that's just steadily grown over the years. There's been kind of inflection points. COVID hit, and then it grew almost doubled overnight to sort of 600 or so people. I think the reason for that was because consultancies are set up to solve a problem, but there wasn't really anybody who had the answer to this. To the pandemic, because the last one was the Spanish flu. So there's not an awful lot of consultancies left over from the Spanish flu to help us out with our problems. And the only people who had the answers were the ones who were struggling day in, day out, trying to figure out how do we deal with this massive challenge that's faced us. So yeah, it's growing steadily over the years. I'm quite proud of it.
That's great.
Well, I have applied to be part of the Talent and Leadership Club, but my application has not been accepted yet.
I'm terribly sorry.
Well, it was about an hour ago, so.
Okay.
But I look forward to joining it.
And actually, one of the reasons I think it's successful might make you realize you might not be able to join. I don't know quite what your background is, but I think one of the things that I do is make sure that we only have in-house learning professionals within the community, because I think that allows people to have open and free dialogue with each other without fear of somebody jumping down their throat saying, "Here's a product, I've got your solution, or I can come in and do that." I think that's one of the things that differentiates it. So
Good.
one of the
I
wrote down a bunch of points.
I
Good,
qualify,
brilliant.
and I will not sell anybody.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah.
The other thing that does, Ben, is that gives everybody a common language, right? Everybody's kind of talking. They might use a little different phraseology, but conceptually, you're all trying to solve similar problems.
Yes,
And,
exactly.
And you can speak each other's language, which is really helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I know you came in with a list of things that you find that are very valuable of learning communities. But on this show, we talked a lot about any social dynamic of learning. And specifically, we had, I think it was a year ago, we talked about learning cohorts. But we never really talked about learning communities because, first of all, I would like to hear from you. How do you think those two differ, or other types of those social structures work? So what would be the difference between a cohort versus a community?
It's a good question. I don't think there's an awful lot of difference. It's probably more sort of the intention behind it and kind of how you set them up. I mean, I've been putting people in cohorts of learners for decades now.
Yeah.
It's like, you're a cohort, congratulations, go and get on with it.
Yeah.
I think the thing that makes it a community is the way you set that up is around kind of the common purpose and instilling a feeling of sort of trust and psychological safety, and making sure they've got a kind of a raison d'etre, which is beyond just sort of, you need to go away and work on this learning task. I think it's got to have something beyond that. Did a program recently at Grant Thornton with Cambridge University, and I think the way we set them up as a population has really kind of created a nicely bonded community of partners within the organisation. I could have easily made them a cohort, like, here's a task, here's a project, go and do it. But actually, it's the extra added dimension they've got of sort of the trust and the camaraderie and the support for each other. Probably, in my view, would make that community rather than just a cohort.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, as you spin up communities, or if you take yours as a case study, what things have you found that didn't work, or that have not worked as you had hoped?
Well, I'm finding a bit interesting with the community I've got. So I've got 1,100 learning folks who are chatting all the time, social media platforms, blah, blah, blah. I've also tried to set up ones for talent acquisition specialists within organizations. and folks in sustainability as well. It's early days and it might grow, but it's not taking off in the same way that the learning one did. And I think it's, I was speculating as to why. I think it's partly the tactics I'm using to do it. I think the Townsend Leadership Club was successful because it had a core group that I worked with very closely in the sort of the early months and years, and we had a kind of a feeling of like we are the core group and we're coming together on kind of the founding fathers to sort of do that, fathers and mothers, to stick with that because it was different. So there's that. Whereas the sustainability one and the talent acquisition one it hasn't had that kind of core group. I also wonder whether, I think learning, this is exposing a complete bias. I think learning is more interesting and there's more variety to talk about. And my talent acquisition colleagues will throw things at me, but I don't know whether there's the same level of variety of conversation as some of the other professions within the HR function. But that's one to be debated and disagreed with, I suspect, from others. But I wonder whether there's the same variety of conversation to be had. So
I would also hope that the learning professionals are really interested in learning.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
And I do think learning people tend to be more social animals as well. Like, when we go to conferences or what, it does seem to be more relational, and I see a lot more friendships developing and a lot more sharing than I have in other professional organizations that I've seen.
I also feel that when I've talked with some of my other colleagues who are outside of the learning development space, maybe specifically within the HR people function, whatever you call it, we tend to do more external networking that I've noticed than some of these my other colleagues. Not to say that they don't, but I feel that we get outside the walls more than what I've noticed, and so we've been connecting. I know I've in my career, I've connected people with conferences we've gone to, or how do you submit proposals to new conferences that you're attending to, even if it's a conference I've never attended. I don't know. I've noticed that, but again, it's completely anecdotal. I don't have any data specifically to prove that, but just something I've observed from it.
I think that's true, but you could also flip it. And you said we do more networking. Is there more networking to be done? And which is the tail wagging the dog? Are the events set up and therefore we go to them because they're more set up, or if they weren't there, would we create them? I guess is probably the question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
One of the things that I found interesting, because I was very active in the ATD forum, which is a community of sorts within the ATD group, was that the openness of the sharing really surprised me when I first started getting into it. I thought everybody was going to kind of hold their trade secrets close, right? And they weren't going to be talking about how they do their onboarding the best or how they do this type of thing. But it was very open. It's like, oh, here's what we do. Here's how we structure it. Here's what's worked. Here's what didn't work. And that gave me license to be really open with sharing. And I think that's part of what has facilitated several of those network connections.
I think you're right. I often ask myself sometimes people don't share things. I know they don't share things because they think there's a source of competitive advantage to be gained from the work they're doing. So particularly in sort of early careers acquisition and sort of onboarding sort of junior talent and that sort of stuff. Or some of the simulations that people do, they're really proud of it and it is going to help them beat the competition, to put it bluntly. So I know what they do and they don't share it. That's fine. But most of the stuff we share, actually, it's probably just addressing pain points. The perennial discussion of, has anyone got a 9-box grid recommendation? No one's going to be getting a massive competitive advantage by sort of understanding that information, and equally you're not giving away a trade secret by discussing how you've implemented 9-box. So I think it's the nature of the conversations we have.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Ben, I know you came with a couple of a bit of a list with a couple of things. You mind sharing some of those, and we can kind of
I'll bash through it really quickly, and then you can kind of put it to pieces, because I don't want to just talking for 20 minutes and a boring list. So I reflected on the community over the years and kind of what's made it successful and things I've kind of done accidentally and sometimes on purpose. But so here you go. So a strong purpose. Mm-hmm. So the purpose of the community I've got is kind of building the collective knowledge of the community and sort of creating greater impact for the learning profession. So for me, that's really important. You've got to have a purpose for your community. I've talked about trust, strong levels of trust. They're created by clear rules. Sometimes you've got to be unpopular. Sometimes you've got to say to people, no, actually, you can't join, or you've overstepped the mark there. So it's got to be kind of boundaries in there. But be clear about who can and can't join. Something to talk about. We've touched on that. There's got to be a WIFM, and what's in it for me. So there's got to be something useful to have. You can't just bring people together for the sake of sort of say, right, you're a group of 50 people, get on with it. There's got to be a benefit to them.
Yeah.
Doesn't work. A core group I've mentioned, that assisted loads, getting critical. And once you've got that, you then get a critical mass, and then it kind of just snowballs. I've just discovered that kind of when you've got sort of a group of sort of 50, 60, 70 people in there, and then there's that kind of FOMO if people aren't in that group, and then you kind of use them to sort of go to others. I now lean on people and sort of say, right, I've just spotted you're the only person in X organization. Do you want to invite your peers along? And generally you get people kind of sharing it that way. Platforms, I'll come to in a second, actually. I'll do that at the end. Be giving and do it for the greater good.
Mhm.
If you're not out, if you're doing it for the wrong reasons and you're not motivated by kind of sharing and building collective knowledge, then it's just going to fail. For me, it's just a labor of love. My wife gives me withered looks when I'm sat there, a laptop on the side of the sofa, or me coming down late from my cabin because I've been trying to onboard another 20 people. Like it's a labor of love. And we do a lot extra. It's really good fun, and I'm really passionate about it. And I think it's important to give something back. Like I said, 25 years. I think it's really important to be kind of bringing on junior talents within the community. It needs to evolve. So change to suit the need.
Mhm.
COVID meant we changed. We flipped to online very quickly, but actually it became a support network. I just set up a series of WhatsApp groups. They filled up within days, and suddenly there were hundreds of conversations going on. Now I've got loads of WhatsApp groups with lots of conversations, and now I can extract the data from there and then share it with the community. So it kind of it kind of builds the collective knowledge of the profession by sharing some of the data back. And the final one I mentioned was platforms. Like I mentioned, we use WhatsApp. We've played with Slack. We've played with other platforms, and just I keep going back to WhatsApp because it's in your hand. You're organising your kids' football the weekend. Oh, by the way, there's a question around sort of, can anybody recommend someone to do some difficult conversations training? Yeah, I know the answer. I'll do it there because it's easy. If you've then got to go into another platform, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So think carefully about the tools you use to kind of build your community would be it. So there's my quick list. Do you want to go into any more detail was probably the question.
I kind of wanted to loop back to the core group idea because, I think kind of the easy way to form a core group is just say, okay, the first bunch of people that comes, this is going to be my core group. But it sounds like you get more strategic around identifying the people who will be a positive part of that core group and, kind of using them as evangelists to bring more people in, recruiters almost.
Yeah, I think so. You can tell. How do you tell is the question, but you can tell people who are more into it than others because they come back and they kind of like volunteer premises and they contribute more on the WhatsApp conversations and various things. So you can then use them as your advisory board, which I've set up, and to do various other things. So I think if I was setting up another community, it would be very much kind of build a core group, but be very careful about who you put in that core group because then, like you said, they're your evangelists to kind of grow the community as well.
Another one I want to dive in is being clear on goals, because I was actually interested when you were joking around with Bob saying that there's a reason why he's not invited yet.
Who can and can't be in it?
Yeah, when I make up mine, I'm going to say no dad jokes. That's my rule. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Like how do people know it? Is it just on your site? Like, how do you make that clear? Because I was starting to think of when you have your core group and you're trying to radiate it out. How do you make sure it's not the game of telephone that occurs? That people are sharing those clear guidelines when they're quote trying to recruit, or see if other people are there, or is it pretty easy? Like, you're a learning development professional, this might be a great place.
Yeah, it's all done through word of mouth. And I want to make this apply to a broader community as well, not just this one, but it's all done through word of mouth. It's funny, I was chatting to somebody about redoing the website the other day and actually getting a proper designer in. And he said, you score like a 2 out of 100 in terms of sort of like your presence on the internet. Okay, is that bad? He said, yes, it's very bad. But it does show that actually it's all grown through word of mouth rather than sort of people finding it and discovering it by searching through Google. At one level, it is as easy as saying, you're an in-house learning professional, you should be part of this community, because I get a lot from it and I get a lot of people doing it that way. Then there's the onboarding instructions. So like, here's the community. Here's for me, that origin story I gave you at the beginning, I must have said that about 3,000 times because it's like, I think it's important people know why it was set up and the purpose of it and the fact that it's done for the right reasons. So that's just imprinted on my brain now in terms of sort of what I do and how I talk about it. So that I talk about that a lot. I mean, practically the WhatsApp group, I always say, look at the group discussion, the group description, because that's got the rules in it, which is basically no pitching, no funnies. It's a big group, recommendations upon request, that sort of stuff. But I think for me, actually, and the bit that applies to broader communities is because that core group kind of almost role models, and that core group keeps getting bigger. Like they just see how they almost see the rules of engagement being modelled by other group members when they're having conversations, and we have events and various things as well. So they see others behaving in a certain way, so therefore they just follow suit. That's kind of, I think that's the bigger thing actually is, and there's two angles to look at it. There's the angle of how do you behave in a non-negative way, but there's also the angle you behave in how do you behave in a kind of a contributing and a sharing and a giving way. And I think actually the latter is probably the more important bit, because you've got people all the time sort of volunteering information and suggesting recommendations and that sort of stuff. So therefore others just follow suit.
Ben, I've got a question about the size of community. Is there, in your thinking, is there a size that's too small or a size that's too big, or is there a way that you can, I mean, if you've got 1,000 people in the community, that sounds like a lot of people to be coordinating. So how do you think about sizing?
Yeah, Dan, it's a really good question. It's one I'm struggling with at the moment because it was easy when it was sort of 150 people and I knew them.
Right. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I suspect you've all stood in a training room and done volume facilitation. And then everyone knows you, but you don't really know everyone. But you still have to have that thing. So it's a bit like that to a certain extent. The number thing concerns me a bit because I guess you're familiar with the Dunbar number, and I've done a whole load of reading around sort of like what's the optimal number at sort of 150. Well, actually, if you look at the groups I've got, I've kind of segmented them for various reasons. One is to kind of future-proof it, because if it hit 1,024, then WhatsApp, that's the limit for a group size. I think a WhatsApp group with 1,000 people in scares the hell out of me, but that's another conversation. But it kind of works at the moment. And the three groups between 180 and 220. And that feels like about the right amount. But then equally, I can't start another one because you can't start one with one, because otherwise they're chatting to themselves. So I don't know how like a beehive, I don't know how you kind of create a new queen and then sort of, to use that analogy, kind of let them fly off and create a new hive somewhere else. So I don't know. It concerns me. I think I don't know how to do the numbers on this and do the data analysis on it, but there's concentric circles, aren't there? So within every community, you've kind of got the core group, and then you've got the peripheral, and then you've got the lurkers. And there's probably a better definition of those. And I think is what you need to keep an eye on is when the core group gets to a certain size, then that's the thing you need to be concerned about. It's actually, you can have probably an infinite amount of lurkers on the edges because they're not really part of the community. They're just sort of there chipping in every now and then, and they're not core. So I don't know, but I need to. It worries me. I need to figure out. So what do you think? Like, what is the answer?
I don't know the answer either. I know that again, when I was part of the ATD forum, we had about 50 companies, and each company could have 2 representatives. So we were in the 100-ish range, and that seemed pretty manageable, and it kept things personable because you pretty much knew the other people, you knew the other representatives. Could it be larger? I think it could be larger. I think it boggles my mind to think that you've got a community of 1,000 people. It just
and it feels to me
but somehow it's working.
Yeah,
so that's great.
It feels to me like to be really effective, a community that big would need to be subdivided into smaller groups with unique purposes for all of those, but then united under the overarching purpose. I think, people would get a great sense of belonging and, that deep purpose, like I'm part of something bigger than me and I'm excited about that by being part of a group of 1,000 people. But to the Dunbar's number argument and all that, you're not going to really feel that connected to people unless you've got a smaller group of people that you're focused on.
And Bob, I could think of a subsection of this. These are people who are trying to solve the onboarding problem.
Correct. Exactly.
Or these are people who are trying to solve, the some type of
the dad joke
coding
problem.
Skill.
Yeah.
I don't know about that one, but I could see subgroups like that working very effectively. And then if someone transfers out of the onboarding space into something else, they might then latch on to another group that's relevant to their liking. So I could see if it's dynamic and people are kind of grasping, the problem that they're trying to solve and joining a group that way. I could see how it could be sustainable.
Yeah, we did do issue-based groups. we had one for talent, one for learning, one for leadership, one for performance manager,
Yeah.
one for D&I. And what actually I found was looking across all the 6 or 7 specialisms, generally they're all quite interrelated. So you ended up having the same conversation in the performance one, in the talent one, because actually it's just only a hop, skip, and a jump over into that one. So yeah, we did look at that. It'd be interesting when someone wants to do some research into the Dunbar number, see whether that, because the 150 is based on sort of like Roman soldiers and sort of English villages. That was the point it grew to being unsustainable, so they had to move and create their own new community, which fascinates me. Whether it's different on social media platforms, and it's also tricky as well. Going back to the big picture community thing is, like, I think Jake, your introduction talked about the community. I think the slight problem is, and I want to write a book on this, is everything's a community at the moment. If you look at kind of like Airbnb and like they're all kind of like, here's like, they're customers or they're suppliers, but everyone, it's a very fashionable word at the moment. I think it's really important to actually define specifically what a community is, rather than calling everything a community, because I think it just blurs it and makes it very confusing.
Yeah.
And I think part of that definition is that WIFM, right? I mean, you start to get at the core. Because the WIFM and the strong purpose are very much, I think, aligned.
Yeah.
Right?
And I could see, like, going back to where you saw a huge spike at the beginning, like during the beginning of the pandemic, where a majority of individuals just trying to solve, like, had a pretty clear problem they were trying to solve of how to now transition in this world where you are no longer in person and there's all these different, very common, like, so many people had so many common problems. It's funny. I got connected with a lot of educational, like K through 12 higher ed educators, and we all had the same thing. It's like I was able to relate to so many different people, regardless of where they came from. So I felt like,
except you had bigger budgets than a lot of the K through 12. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But the thing the problem that you're trying to solve was kind of what gravitated us together and made that solid. So when I think of communities within a professional, like a corporate structure, you may have like a community of practice of technologists, but then inside of that, you could organize it based off of your role. But like to your point, Ben, a lot of those things cross. So what I've seen well is when they link it more towards like problems or like, think of the developer communities, that there are multiple ones that exist around sharing code. And, you're trying to solve this type of problem. Well, I got this like stack of code that you can leverage and use and blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. Have you found that like linking it to problems, maybe a thing as you grow larger?
Yes, you're bang on. So I've been chatting with other organisations, not specifically mine, but other organisations about kind of what problems they face. I was chatting with a shipping company and chatting with a children's kind of toy manufacturer, and actually what they found to create cross-organisational communities was make it problem-based.
Yeah.
You don't, because a couple of reasons. One is actually the function is already set up as a team, so you don't need to kind of build a community because they're already connected as a team. But secondly, I think more importantly, if you could say, look, here's an issue that we're trying to address as an organisation, let's bring a community together with a common purpose. That seems to work very well. And it also speaks to the kind of the next iteration of the community that I want to do is actually, let's look at the kind of the learning ecosystem, and figure out, okay, well, I've got a lot of in-house learning professionals, but there's the supply side, you've got academia, there's lots of other people who've got an interest in human performance and organizational performance. So let's see what we can do to kind of bring together the broader ecosystem to tackle some of the difficult challenges you've got. To your problems point, Jake, around, okay, here's joint challenge we face, rather than just bring you together because you've got a common interest and profession.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, we are just about out of time. I know you said you didn't want this to be an advert, but we're going to force it upon you anyway. So if anybody is interested in the Talent and Leadership Club, how do they get onto it? How do they find you? What's the process?
I really should have set up a form before I did this. Otherwise, so I think the easiest way, I don't know whether you have show notes or something, but the easiest way is just to drop me an email, which is ben.chambers@talentandleadership.co.uk. Nice and easy. Or you can just go to the website and you can find it. It'd be great, particularly stateside. I've got quite a big population in the US, but more would be great. I think there's probably about 800 UK folks and a couple hundred US folks. It'd be good to get some more.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
and
I'll
hopefully
put those
you'll
in
get
the show
one
notes.
more, if I get approved. I'm just
Yeah.
waiting.
I don't know. You are from California. That might be a disqualifier.
Oh my
I'm not
goodness.
sure.
But he's chosen to support Arsenal, so that's a plus in my view, which kind of gives you, like, it's kind of like
Very good.
playing points. It's like joining a private members club. It kind of bumps you up a bit.
Yeah, go Gunners. All right.
What do they say? I wouldn't want to join a club that would have me as a member or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
That's
it's
classic.
Like right?
yeah,
That's
exactly,
right.
exactly. Well, hey, Ben, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a
Yeah, it's been
pleasure
great.
getting to know you. Jake and Dana, as always, thanks for joining me in this. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. And hopefully you got something out of this and can jump into that community. We'll be back real soon with another episode of the Learning Geeks podcast. Until then, keep learning, hang in there, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
And join a community.
Join a community.
There you go. Thanks
Thanks,
everyone.